Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a multifaceted professional who's got achievements in multiple areas from Santa Fe, Mexico, Mr. Doug Lynam. Doug, welcome to the show.
Welcome. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Doug is an author of a book titled Taming Your Money Monster. You can see the book behind him. He's a keynote speaker, a celebrity coach, and a best-selling author. Doug was also a Marine Corps officer, a Benedictine monk, where he taught mathematics at a private school, and then worked with Longview Asset Management in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So, Doug, your path from Marine to monk to money manager is fascinating. Tell me about your journey and what drove you to make each of these amazing transitions.
It's a long story. I'll try to keep it short. But essentially, I grew up in a fairly affluent family in the Midwest of America. But money in my family, it felt, at least from my childhood experience, it felt like it was weaponized. Like money was the thing that everyone used to harm and control each other.
Yeah.
And so my brothers and I, we all rebelled against that in very different ways. The first thing I tried to do to um, could it be more different from how I was raised was to go off and join the Marine Corps. And part of the reasons why I was attracted to the Marines is I kind of wanted to prove that I was a manly man who could do manly things and impress my father. And that didn't really work. He didn't even bother to show up to my graduation from Marine Corps Officer Candidate School, even though I finished at the top of my class. And then I had a bit of a spiritual awakening. I kind of realized that high explosives and unresolved anger issues were probably a bad combination, and that maybe a career in the military wasn't the right choice for me. So I also was looking to find meaning and purpose in my life, and also God. And so and also another great way to really annoy my parents was
Yeah.
to go off and join a monastery. So I succeeded on all those fronts. And so what I found in the monastery was the camaraderie, the esprit de corps, the sense of purpose that I liked about the Marines, but with what I felt was maybe a bit of a higher calling and higher purpose.
Yeah.
But about 3 years, so I was then in the monastery for 20 years, but about 3 years in, much to my surprise, I found myself living in a community where everyone hated dealing with money as much as I did. And that turns out that doesn't work out very well. That if you live in if we all hate dealing with money, the end result, of course, was bankruptcy. That the community ended up becoming financially insolvent, and then by some weird stroke of luck or misfortune, however you want to put it, resolving the community's finances fell onto my shoulders, and so I did that. I started by just going to a bookstore and grabbing every book on finance I could get and reading them and then putting them into practice and then was successful with that and in solving the community's financial struggles, and then realized I had talent for it. And so um, while I was also in the monastery, it was a teaching order. So I was teaching in a private high school, and as you mentioned, I was the head of the math department there. And so I started teaching economics and personal finance as an elective course because I thought it was important that we teach our kids this stuff, because I certainly wasn't taught it, and most people are not. And then fast forward, several more years, maybe a decade. And for a class project, I opened up the school retirement plan to see how it worked, to show the kids, give them some hands-on real world experience, and realized that the entire thing was a complete train wreck. It was a mess. The fees were high. The fund performance was poor. There was no fiduciary oversight. All the things that, could be going wrong with it were going wrong with it. And turned out that was a problem across teacher retirement plans across the United States. It's an endemic issue. And I had this crazy idea. Well, here's a pain point, and here's a multi-billion-dollar problem. Maybe I could make some money solving it. So some crazy idea. I started my own investment advisory firm while I was a monk in a monastery to solve this problem, teacher retirement plans. And I did that. I got my first client, and I decided, okay, now it was time to leave the monastery. I was sort of tired of that life for a number of reasons. And then by a sheer stroke of luck, the New York Times did a six-piece expose, did a different hard-hitting article, one a month, every month for 6 months, on the problem of teacher retirement plans across the U.S. right while I was launching this business. And So I wrote them on Facebook and said, "Hey guys, love these articles. By the way, here's my crazy story." Next thing I know, there's a guy named Ron Lieber, who's the head of the financial column for the New York Times, flies out to Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I live, and did a big piece, and that went viral on the front page of the business section of the New York Times and launched my career. So that's kind of the quick
Wow.
story of how I got to where I am.
Wow. What an amazing story. And thank you for sharing it with me and my viewers and listeners. Um, One more question before I come to your book. How do you reconcile your spiritual grounding
Mhm.
with the financial world, which is often perceived as materialistic?
Well, I think there's I think, and this was something it took me many years to work through myself, and is somehow the idea that the materialistic world and the spiritual world are antithetical to each other. That there's something that I think it's a false dichotomy, right? That
Yeah.
if you really are living a truly spiritual life, it has to be grounded in the material world, or
Correct.
else you're not being very effective.
Hmm.
And so I used to think, growing up that, St. Paul said that the love of money is the root of all evil. And I think I now follow Mark Twain a little bit more closely when Mark Twain humorously said that it's the lack of money that's the root of all evil.
Absolutely.
That
Yes.
the truth is really somewhere in between. The truth is that money is morally neutral. Money isn't good. Money isn't bad. It's how we use it that matters. But what
Correct.
I found is if you don't have any money, then you don't have any power. And if you don't have power, you can't make much of a difference in the world. And so in the monastery, I was completely frustrated for 2 decades trying to live a life of love and service and compassion. But without any money in your pocket, it's hard to do anything and you can't get anything done. And so I try to, in my books, is to teach people how to bring these two worlds of the material and spiritual together so they can empower each other and empower individuals to live the life that they want and also to be able to use their wealth
Hmm.
as a tool for love and service in the world to go out there and heal the crack in the world that they were designed to fix.
Amazing. Doug, let's now talk about your book, Taming Your Money Monster. And before I ask you a question, I'm going to ask all our viewers and listeners to go and check out Mr. Doug Lynam's book, Your Money Monster. Tell me a little bit about your book and what was your hypothesis when you wrote it? And of course, what is a money monster?
Okay. Well, so the subtitle of the book is Nine Paths to Money Mastery with the Enneagram.
Mm.
And so, for those of your readers who are not familiar with the Enneagram, it's a personality typology system. But what it really is, it's this ancient system that's essentially the physics of consciousness. We've been building the system since the beginning of time, and we've really only been able to make it really a robust system in the past, 70 to 80 years where we've been able to ground it in both neurobiology and childhood developmental psychology. So you have to think of your personality as having two components. It's got a nature component and a nurture component. So your nature is your DNA and your genetics, and that's predetermined. But the nurture, that's your Enneagram type. Like your childhood environment is what shapes the nurture part of your personality.
Yeah.
And the Enneagram explains how that works, how it develop, how your ego developed in childhood, what your childhood ego defense mechanisms are that create your Enneagram type. And in the Enneagram, so Ennea means nine in ancient Greek, and gram means drawn. So Enneagram means nine things drawn,
Mm.
which is just these nine archetypal patterns of personality that we now know from the science are very real.
Mhm.
Um, and so then when we take these different personality types and I layer on top of that what I call the attachment theory of money, which is very similar to the attachment theory of relationships, if anyone's familiar with that. But what the attachment theory of money says is that there's two unhealthy ways that we can relate to money. We can have an anxious attachment to it, kind of like the Ebenezer Scrooge or Gordon Geckos of the world, or we can be money avoidant, like I was growing up, like people who don't want to have anything to do with money, who are scared of it or they push it away out of fear or anxiety. And so there's these two kind of unhealthy ways we can relate to money, and those create our money monsters. And so there's nine personality patterns in the Enneagram, then there's two different money monsters you can have, one for each of the different Enneagram types. And that those money monsters can show up in different areas of our lives. So there are what I call the four pillars of finance. And so the four pillars of finance are earning, saving, investing, and giving. And so you can be anxious or avoidant any one of those areas, or you could be jumbled. You're not just all anxious or all avoidant. Most of us tend to be a little bit jumbled. We tend to maybe be anxious earners but avoidant savers, right? Or we might be anxious investors but avoidant givers. So then it could change depending on the time of day and how you're feeling. But that basically gives you a sense of what the money monsters are, and then the book goes through how do you overcome them so you have a really robust and healthy financial life in all aspects.
What a great response. Thank you. You also have a second book, which we can see just behind you,
Mhm.
which is Monk to Money Manager. What is the difference between your messaging in these two books?
Well, I would say the first book is it's called From Monk to Money Manager, a former monk's financial guide to becoming a little bit wealthy
Okay.
and why that's okay.
Hmm.
So the first book is a how-to book. It's a basic primer of all the nuts and bolts you need to know and all the things I wish I had known when I was
Hmm.
younger about how to build wealth, about earning, saving, investing, giving, insurance, taxes, all the things that how does compound interest work? There's nothing so it's a really just good, solid, broad
Hmm.
primer on financial literacy. And then using my stories and my time in the monastery as a hook to kind of make it entertaining. So, like all the crazy things that happened in the monastery while I was there, and all the things that happened after I became a money manager, like, like all the client stories, just to kind of give it some punch and some pop.
Hmm.
Whereas, so that's a how-to book. Whereas Taming Your Money Monster is a why do book. It's a why do you do stupid things with your money over and over and over again. And so it's really book. It's really a book on the psychology of money and how to have a healthier relationship, mostly to yourself, so
Hmm.
you can have a healthier relationship to money.
Amazing. You also describe money as stored work energy.
Mhm.
Can you tell us a little more about this concept?
Well, sure. Just like a chemical energy, like a piece of wood is
Mhm.
chemical energy that's been stored, and then when you light it, it gives off heat and light, and you can put that energy to work. And
Mm,
same thing, kind of like with money. It's this,
mm,
it's a way of taking our, if, for example, if you were working in a job and you make $50 an hour, you've traded that $50 of time for $50, and you stored that hour of work energy in that $50 that you can now store and stick in your bank account or stick in your wallet, or you can invest it to grow it. But essentially, now you don't need to spend it right away. Like as opposed to bartering, like in the old days, we would barter for chickens or turkeys, or I'll give you two chickens and you give me a bushel of corn. Like
yeah.
very inefficient way of engaging in commerce, where money lets us take our time, our effort, whatever, our creativity, and store it in this thing called money, so that we can then use it later when and where and how we want.
Well said. You also mention in your book that money issues are rarely about money. What are they really about then?
Oh, they're about our egos.
Okay.
They're about our deepest fears, our insecurities, our anxieties, all of these things. Childhood traumas come out and play a lot. I just
Mm,
see it over and over again with clients I work with. It's like a
right.
lot of their people's money issues is like a lot of times they're just playing out their childhood wounds,
Mm,
and they carry them through into their adulthood, and they're trying to assuage a lot of their existential terrors in some sense with money, and that doesn't always end well.
well said. Doug, you also emphasize the role of childhood trauma in money behavior.
Mhm.
Why is it important to address this?
Well, because as a friend of mine, Richard Rohr, often says, he said that if we don't transform our pain,
Hmm.
we are destined to transmit it,
Hmm.
most especially to those we love, like our
Hmm.
children.
Hmm.
And what I have found is that one of the best ways to mute our or to transmit our pain is through money. That
Hmm.
money makes the world run. So money is how we engage in most actions in the world.
Hmm.
If
Hmm.
we don't heal our childhood traumas and our wounds, inevitably money becomes the medium or tool through which we transmit that pain to
Hmm.
the people around us, most especially to those that we love. And so that's why I think it's so important that what I'm trying to do in Taming Your Money Monsters, really trying to get people to have a healthy relationship to themselves, so then they can have a healthy relationship to their money and how they're using it and how they're spending it, so they can have lots of it and use it as a tool for love and service to a suffering world, which is where I think what we're all really called to do.
Well said. A few minutes back, you were talking about the Enneagram uh, types, and I want
Mhm.
to just continue with a couple more questions on that. Can you give us a quick example of a money monster from one or two types of Enneagrams?
Well, sure. I'll just pick on myself for a minute if I could. In the Enneagrams, I'm a type three, and
Hmm.
so what that means is this. It means that well, I'll give you a quick explanation of how the Enneagram works.
Hmm.
So it,
Hmm.
it'll I'll try to go quick with this, but you have to do a bit of a thought experiment.
Yeah.
It's like, well, what was your consciousness like when you were in your mother's womb
Hmm.
before you were born? And so the axiomatic assumption in the Enneagram is that you were in a state of unconscious unity,
Hmm.
meaning you were one with everything you could experience,
Hmm.
unified with that, but it was very limited, right? You had a very meager sense of reality. But then eventually, you develop, you get born, you get popped out, and surprise, there's more to the world than just you.
Hmm.
And there's a physical, you have a physical umbilical cord that gets cut, obviously.
Yeah.
But immediately, as soon as you're born, there's a psychological umbilical cord
Hmm.
that forms between you and your caregivers because your ego isn't developed yet. Your parents have to do the driving of your ego for the first, 0 to 7 to 10 years of your life. Okay. But then what happens is that psychological umbilical cord has to be cut.
Hmm.
And it can only be cut by the sharpest of negative emotions
Hmm.
because positive emotions will just reinforce your connection to your caregivers. So slowly over time, negative emotions are going to cut that psychological umbilical cord between you and your caregivers. But we know from the neurobiology, and this is from the work of a scientist by the name of Jaak Panksepp, that there are only three core negative emotions in all mammalian brains. So in the mid limbic region of mammals, there's these three negative emotional circuitries, and that's anger,
Hmm.
sadness, sometimes called shame. So anger, sadness, and fear. So
Hmm.
those are the three primary big three negative emotions.
Right.
And your Enneagram type is determined by which one of those three negative emotions you get hit with more of than
Hmm.
the other.
Hmm.
Okay. So that creates these. So if you think of a color wheel, and if we could put it into three quadrants,
Hmm.
so we call these three triads. So that's going to be, we're going to have an anger triad, we're going to have a sadness triad, and we're going to have a fear triad. Okay. Then each of those three negative emotions can be processed
Hmm.
in one of three different ways. So let's say we're dealing with the sadness triad, which is where I'm in. Okay. Then you could take that sadness and you could internalize it, which is kind of like giving yourself an emotional wedgie.
Hmm.
You can externalize it, which is kind of like having a food fight with the world,
Hmm.
or you can have both. And that's why so there's three different Enneagram types within each of those three triads. And that's why there's nine Enneagram personality patterns, even though inside each one of those patterns is an infinite amount of variety. Like it isn't like, okay, just because you're in this one type, it doesn't limit you in some fundamental way. It tells you the overall structure or chassis of your ego, just like a car. Like this is an infinite variety of cars out there, and you drive a unique year, make, and model. But there's kind of a model of car that you drive. Like there's SUVs, there's sports cars, there's family sedans. Even though yours is totally unique, it still has to fall into a certain model of
Hmm.
car in
Hmm.
order to be roadworthy.
Hmm.
And same thing with a human personality. It has to
Hmm.
fall into one of these archetypal patterns,
Yeah.
or else it just can't be roadworthy. It doesn't
Hmm.
work. And
Hmm.
so that's how we get the nine types.
Hmm.
Okay. That's the quickest overview I could give
Yeah.
you. Now
Yeah.
let's talk about one in particular, which would be my
Hmm.
type, which is
Hmm.
type three. So I call this cutting of the psychological umbilical cord your sacred wound. Right? It
Hmm.
has to happen. We have all got it, right? And so for me, my sacred wound is sadness or shame that I both internalize, which means I feel sadness about how I perceive myself,
Hmm.
and I externalize it, meaning I feel sadness about how I think other people perceive me. And what that does is it creates my greatest unconscious fear, and we all have one, and there isn't any of these that are better or worse than the others.
Yeah.
But for type three, my greatest unconscious fear is that I'm fundamentally worthless,
Hmm.
that I don't have any value or value in the world. And so what that does is it creates what's called the achiever, or I call them the race car of egos.
Hmm.
So the
Hmm.
type three is the achiever because we're always gunning for the next achiever. We're always running for the finish line. We're getting the gold star from the teacher, the pat on the head from our boss, the next promotion, the next book. We're always trying to get external forms of validation to assuage this deepest fear of not having of being worthless.
Hmm.
And so then when we that's the nugget of the Enneagram. And then if we layer on top of that the money monsters of either being anxious or avoidant, for a type three, the money anxious type three is what I call the blinger,
Hmm.
meaning they're always want the status symbols. They got to have the fancy house, the big car, the
Yeah.
gold, the trophy wife, the trophy husband, or whatever it is that
Hmm.
they think is going to bring them all the social status. So
Yeah.
they just blinging out their life, even if they can't afford it, right? It doesn't
Okay.
matter if it's in their budget or not, they got to have it. So
Okay.
that's what I call the blinger. Or there's the people like me who are type threes who are money avoidant, and you could be
Hmm.
called the barrier, meaning you sort of bury your head in the sand and you don't
Hmm.
want to look at the shame or the sadness or the anxiety that all your money issues are causing you because it's just all the icky feelings. So you basically are burying your head in the sand like an ostrich and not willing to look at any of it while your financial life continues to deteriorate and go downhill.
Amazing. This is such an amazing explanation. I'm going to now read up much more on Enneagrams and learn a little more. Thank you for this introduction. Doug,
You're
I have time
welcome.
for two or three more questions. My next question is I was also fascinated to read about ethical wealth building when I was preparing for my conversation with you. What does ethical wealth building look like to you?
Wow. Well, so it's a tough question to answer succinctly, but I think for me, it's about building wealth that's in alignment with my values. So when I teach people about ethical wealth building, it's not about me trying to tell you what your values should be
Correct.
and preach to you. It's like, no, it's about you figuring out what your ethics are and what your values are, and then trying to live a life that's in alignment with that as much as possible, because that's what's going to give you the happiest life you can live.
Mm,
Right. So if you're making money doing something that you find morally repugnant, well, that's gonna eat on your conscience. It's gonna weigh on your soul.
mm,
And so it's really for me, it's like, well, there are certain business practices that I find repugnant. So
mm,
I'm not gonna get a job in certain corporations.
mm,
But there's others that I do. So my firm was we call it a certified B corporation. So we met the highest standards of ethical and environmental regulations possible
mhm,
for our industry. So
mhm,
I was very proud of that.
mhm,
For me, that's what it looked like on a very practical level. Um, but also including in terms of how I invest my money, what companies
mhm,
I want to invest in, and what industries and what products and services. So it also and how I spend it. What am I spending my money on?
yeah.
So I think all of that's about what I mean about ethical, building it ethically, investing it ethically, and spending it ethically, and then also giving is a huge part of too. Like, what are you doing to give back? You got all this money, great, but you just can sit there on a beach and sip pina coladas for the rest of your life, and while the world burns around you, that doesn't seem like a very,
Very
I mean,
nice.
nothing wrong with sitting on a beach sipping pina coladas for a weekend, but like forever, no
Correct.
thanks.
Great response. Time for two more questions for you.
Okay.
Um, you describe money as morally neutral. How do
Mhm.
we ensure it serves love, not ego?
Well, okay. So the simple answer is your ego. You have to have an ego, right?
Correct.
So you're never not going to have an ego.
Mm,
But the Enneagram can help teach you how to have the healthiest expression of your ego,
mm,
and where your pitfalls are likely to be, um, so that you can be on the path to
mm,
being more loving on a daily basis.
mm,
And again, it's not up to me to tell you what your values are, what that looks like, but I think we can at least agree that love is sort of a pretty universal thing, and that it's it's really just about that daily kind of gut check. am I truly living a life of love and service? And I think when we are, we know it. And when we're not, we kind of know that too. Um, and I think a spiritual practice helps. It doesn't matter what it is, what
Yeah.
your religious faith or tradition
Mhm.
is.
Mhm.
But I think that those are good things to have, or a community around you that helps us keep our ego in check and calls us
Mhm.
out when we may not
Mhm.
be acting in the most ethical or highest forms of expression of love that we can. But it's again, there's no easy button to that question, to
Correct.
answering that one.
Absolutely.
But nonetheless, I think we could
No,
agree
but
that there is
you
at
give
least
me
a
a good
path.
response. Thank you. And my last question for you, Doug. What's one practical exercise from your book that listeners can try today to begin taming their money manager? Money
Well, okay,
monster,
well,
my apologies.
Monster, well, I think the first thing you have to do is read the book. Because if you don't understand the Enneagram deeply, then
Yeah.
nothing is going to make a lot of sense.
Mm.
So once you read the book, I think it's really going to be about, I would just say if I could keep it to something very simple that
Yeah.
anyone could listening right now could understand was
Mm.
just take a minute and think about those four pillars of finance that we talked about earlier. Think about earning, saving, investing, and giving. And just think for a minute about where do you struggle the most? Which
Mm.
of those pillars is most challenging for you?
Mm.
Or think about whether you tend to be more anxious in one or avoid in another. How do you, which are you, anxious or avoidant, or maybe you're healthy in some of those areas as well?
Mm.
And
Mm.
just kind of do that quick self-assessment. And then I think that will give you you'll pretty quickly find out what you need to be focusing on
Mm.
and where your struggles are financially. And
Mm.
then the book can take you the next step deeper.
Well said. And on that note, and your four amazing pillars of finance, earning, saving, investing, giving, Doug, thank you so much for speaking to me about your own incredible journey. What an amazing journey you've had, and what a diverse set of experiences that you've been through. Thank you for speaking to me about your book, Taming Your Money Monsters. And you're so right. You know, it's important for us to understand the Enneagrams to be able to understand your book much better. I said I will go read up a little more about the Enneagrams. Thank you for also talking to us at such length about so many different aspects of money. And I think, talking about money as stored energy, talking about money as, to handle your ego. I mean, these are all things that one has knows in the background, but you articulating it made a very big difference. Thank you for
Well, I'm
speaking to
glad.
me, and good luck to you.
Thank you. It was an honor to be on your show. Take
Thank,
care.
thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.